In October of 1881, a farmer's wife in rural Iowa vanished from her bed during the full moon. Her husband found her at dawn, standing barefoot in the cornfield, mud caked under her fingernails, whispering words in a language no one recognized. It happened again the next month, and the month after that. By the fourth full moon, the entire town knew something was hunting her. By the seventh, they realized she wasn't the one being hunted. Margaret Holloway didn't believe in curses. She believed in hard work, Sunday prayer, and the Iowa soil that fed her family. When she married Thomas Holloway in the spring of 1879, she moved into his farmhouse on the edge of Crawford County, where the cornfield stretched so far you could forget the rest of the world existed. The land was good. The harvests were strong. Life was simple. Until the night of September 21st, 1881. Thomas woke to an empty bed. The sheets on Margaret's side were cold, like she'd been gone for hours. He called her name, checked the kitchen, the parlor, even the root cellar. Nothing. Panic set in. He grabbed a lantern and stepped into the night, and that's when he saw her. Margaret stood in the middle of the cornfield about 50 yards from the house. Her white nightgown glowed under the full moon. She wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, her arms hanging at her sides. Thomas ran to her, shouting her name, but she didn't respond. When he reached her, he saw her eyes were open, staring straight ahead, unblinking. "Margaret," he said, shaking her shoulders. "Margaret, wake up." She blinked once, twice, then looked at him like she didn't recognize him. "Thomas?" she whispered. "What are we doing out here?" She had no memory of leaving the house, no memory of walking through the cornfield. Thomas brought her inside, wrapped her in blankets, and convinced himself it was sleepwalking. People did that sometimes. Stress, maybe. The harvest season was hard on everyone. But 1 month later, it happened again. October 21st. Full moon. Thomas woke to find Margaret gone. This time, he didn't waste time searching the house. He went straight to the cornfield, and there she was, in the exact same spot. Same white nightgown, same vacant stare. But this time, her feet were bleeding. Deep cuts crisscrossed the soles like she'd been walking on broken glass, and her hands were covered in dirt, mud packed under her fingernails like she'd been digging. Thomas carried her home. She woke up confused, frightened, with no memory of how she got there. He cleaned her wounds, bandaged her feet, and the next morning, he rode into town to see the doctor. Dr. Emil Craven had been practicing medicine in Crawford County for 20 years. He'd seen plenty of strange things, farm accidents, fevers that made people hallucinate, infections that drove men mad. But when Thomas described what was happening to Margaret, the doctor went quiet. "Has she been near the old Dietrich property?" Dr. Craven asked. Thomas frowned. "The Dietrich farm? That's been abandoned for years." "I know," the doctor said, "but there's a reason it's been abandoned." The Dietrich family had owned the land adjacent to the Holloways before Thomas ever moved to Iowa. They were German immigrants, kept to themselves, didn't attend church. The locals respected their privacy, but rumors spread anyway. Rumors about strange lights in their fields at night. Rumors about livestock going missing. Rumors about old Anna Dietrich, the matriarch of the family, who people claimed practiced something darker than prayer. In 1871, 10 years before Margaret's first episode, the entire Dietrich family disappeared. Not moved away. Disappeared. Their house was found empty, dinner still on the table, clothes still in the drawers. No signs of struggle, no bodies. The town marshal investigated but found nothing. Eventually, the land was claimed by the county, and no one ever lived there again. Thomas didn't put much stock in ghost stories, but Dr. Craven's warning stuck with him. He asked around town, carefully, and the few old-timers who remembered the Dietrichs refused to talk about them. One man, a blacksmith named Otto Reinhardt, pulled Thomas aside and said something that made his blood run cold. "Your wife walks during the full moon, yes?" Otto asked. Thomas nodded. Anna Dietrich did the same thing, for months before they all vanished. Thomas felt sick. He thanked Otto and rode home, trying to convince himself it was coincidence. But when November came, and the full moon rose again, Margaret vanished from their bed for the third time. This time, Thomas didn't wait. He followed her. He stayed awake, pretending to sleep, watching Margaret from the corner of his eye. Just after midnight, she sat up. Her movements were slow, mechanical, like a puppet being pulled by strings. She stood, walked to the door, and stepped outside. Thomas grabbed his coat and followed at a distance, lantern in hand. Margaret walked through the cornfield with purpose, her bare feet making no sound on the dry earth. She didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. She walked like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Thomas stayed back, afraid that if he called out, she might bolt. She didn't stop at the edge of their property. She kept walking, crossing into the overgrown fields of the old Dietrich farm. The corn here was wild, untended, growing in twisted, unnatural rows. The air felt different, heavier. Thomas's lantern flickered, even though there was no wind. Margaret stopped in the center of the field, near a patch of ground where the corn didn't grow. The soil was dark, almost black, and perfectly circular. She knelt down and started digging with her bare hands. Thomas watched, frozen, as she clawed at the earth, pulling up handfuls of dirt and tossing them aside. She dug for what felt like hours, her hands bleeding, her nightgown covered in mud. And then she stopped. She reached into the hole and pulled something out. It was small, wrapped in rotted cloth. Margaret held it up to the moonlight, and Thomas saw it clearly. A doll. Handmade, crude, with a face stitched from burlap and hair made from corn silk. Margaret cradled it like a baby, whispering something Thomas couldn't hear. He stepped closer, and a twig snapped under his boot. Margaret's head snapped toward him. Her eyes were wrong. Not her eyes. They were pale, milky, like cataracts had formed in seconds. She smiled, and it wasn't Margaret's smile. "She's been waiting," Margaret said, but the voice wasn't hers. It was older, raspier, with an accent Thomas didn't recognize. He stumbled backward, and Margaret stood, still holding the doll. She walked past him, back toward the house, and Thomas followed, too terrified to do anything else. By the time they reached home, Margaret had collapsed. Thomas carried her inside, and when she woke the next morning, she remembered nothing. But the doll was on the kitchen table. Thomas didn't know what to do. He considered burning the doll, but something stopped him. Some instinct that told him destroying it would make things worse. Instead, he locked it in a trunk in the barn and told Margaret nothing. The fourth full moon came in December. Margaret vanished again. Thomas found her in the same spot, digging in the same black circle of earth. This time, she pulled out a second doll. By January, there were 3. By February, 4. Each time, Margaret dug up another doll, and each time, she brought it home without realizing it. Thomas started locking the bedroom door at night, but it didn't matter. Margaret would find a way out. The windows, the cellar hatch. Once, Thomas woke to find her standing over him, dirt on her hands, her eyes that same terrible pale white. He stopped sleeping. The town started to notice. Margaret grew thin, her skin pale, her eyes sunken. People whispered when she came to the general store. The minister visited the farm and prayed over her, but it did nothing. Dr. Craven came again, but he had no medicine for what was happening. "You need to leave this place," the doctor said quietly. "Take her and go." Tonight. Thomas wanted to. He packed their belongings, hitched the wagon, and planned to leave at first light. But that night was March 21st. Another full moon. Margaret vanished from the locked bedroom. Thomas searched the house and found every door and window still locked from the inside. He ran to the cornfield, but she wasn't there. She was gone. He searched for 3 days. The town formed search parties. They combed every field, every barn, every inch of land between the Holloway farm and the Dietrich property. They found nothing. On the 4th day, Thomas went back to the black circle in the Dietrich field. He brought a shovel and started digging where Margaret had dug so many times before. He dug until his hands bled, until the sun set, until the hole was 6 feet deep. And then he hit something. It wasn't earth. It was wood. Old, rotted wood. Thomas cleared the dirt away and found a coffin. Not a proper coffin. A handmade box, rough and splintered. He pried it open, and inside he found bones. Human bones. Small ones. A child. And wrapped around the tiny skeleton was a necklace made of corn silk and dried flowers. The same kind of necklace Margaret had been wearing the last time he saw her. Thomas stumbled back, and that's when he heard it. A voice. Faint, distant, coming from somewhere deep below the ground. "Help me!" It was Margaret's voice. Thomas dug faster, tearing at the earth with his bare hands, but the voice grew fainter, sinking deeper until it disappeared entirely. He never found her. The town buried the child's remains in the church cemetery. No one knew who the child was, but the minister said the proper words. Thomas stayed at the farm for 2 more months, hoping Margaret would come back. She didn't. On May 21st, the next full moon, Thomas went to the black circle one last time. He brought a lantern, a Bible, and a pistol. He waited. At midnight, the ground began to move. The earth shifted, bulging upward like something was pushing from below. Thomas stepped back, raising the lantern, and watched as a hand broke through the soil. Then another. Then a head. Margaret crawled out of the ground, covered in dirt, her nightgown torn and filthy. But she was smiling. "I found them," she whispered. "I found all of them." Behind her, more hands pushed through the earth, small hands, children's hands. One by one they emerged, pale and silent, their eyes empty, their mouths moving without sound. Thomas ran. He didn't stop running until he reached town, and when the marshal and a group of men returned to the Dietrich field at dawn, they found nothing. No hole, no bodies, no Margaret. The Holloway farm was abandoned. Thomas left Iowa and was never heard from again. The Dietrich property remained empty, and to this day, no one will build on that land. But every full moon, people in Crawford County report seeing lights in the old cornfield. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear a woman singing, a lullaby, soft and sweet, in a language no one can place. Local historians tried to research what happened to the Dietrich family, but records are scarce. Most documents from that period were destroyed in a courthouse fire in 1893. The few surviving papers mention Anna Dietrich only once, in a letter written by a missionary who visited the farm in 1870. He described her as a woman who mourned too deeply, who had lost 7 children to fever and famine before coming to America. He wrote that she refused to let them go, that she kept their belongings in a locked room, and spoke to them as if they were still alive. The missionary's letter ends abruptly. His final words, "I fear she has found a way to bring them back." Whether Margaret Holloway became part of Anna's twisted resurrection, or something worse, no one knows. But the pattern she followed, the dolls, the digging, the children, it all pointed to something that had been set in motion long before she ever stepped foot on that land. Some say the Dietrich children never truly died, that Anna found a way to tether them to the earth, binding their souls to the cornfield, waiting for the right person to complete the ritual. Margaret was simply the vessel, the final piece. If you're wondering why Thomas never went back to save her, the truth is, he tried. 3 months after he fled to Illinois, he returned to Crawford County with a priest and 2 armed men. They brought holy water, iron nails, and enough courage to face whatever was in that field. They found the black circle of earth, just as Thomas described. But when they started digging, they didn't find bones or coffins or children. They found Margaret. She was buried 6 feet down, her hands folded across her chest, her eyes open. She'd been dead for months, but her body hadn't decayed. She looked exactly as she had the last time Thomas saw her. Peaceful, almost smiling. The priest performed a blessing and ordered the men to rebury her in consecrated ground, but when they tried to move her body, she was too heavy. 4 grown men couldn't lift her. It was as if the earth itself refused to let her go. They left her there. The priest said a final prayer, and they sealed the hole with stones and iron crosses. Thomas never spoke of it again. He lived the rest of his life in Illinois, working as a farmhand, never marrying, never returning to Iowa. But the story didn't end. In 1899, 18 years after Margaret's disappearance, a new family bought the land. The Mullers were German immigrants, unaware of the history. They cleared the fields, tore down the old Holloway house, and built a new one. For 6 months, everything was fine. Then Mrs. Muller started sleepwalking. She would wake up in the cornfield barefoot with no memory of how she got there. Her husband found dolls buried in the same black circle of earth. By the 7th full moon, Mrs. Muller vanished entirely. The Mullers abandoned the property within a year. After that, the county stopped trying to sell it. The land was left to rot, and over time, the cornfield grew wild, swallowing the remains of both houses. But the stories persisted. In the 1920s, a group of teenagers dared each other to spend the night in the old Dietrich field during a full moon. Only 3 of the 5 came back. The 2 who stayed claimed they saw a woman in white walking through the corn, holding the hands of children who didn't cast shadows. The teenagers who returned refused to speak about what they saw, but one of them, a boy named Henry Keller, was found dead 2 weeks later. He'd hanged himself in his family's barn. His suicide note contained only one sentence: "She's still digging." In the 1940s, during World War II, the government considered using the land for military training exercises. Surveyors were sent to assess the property. 2 of them reported hearing singing coming from underground. One surveyor claimed he saw handprints appearing in the soil, small handprints, as if children were pressing their palms against the earth from below. The government abandoned the project. In the 1960s, a documentary crew tried to investigate the legend. They set up cameras in the cornfield and recorded for 3 nights during the full moon. On the 3rd night, all of their equipment malfunctioned simultaneously. The footage was corrupted, except for one frame: a single image of a woman standing in the corn, her face obscured, her hands reaching toward the camera. The crew never returned. By the 1980s, the legend of Margaret Holloway had faded into local folklore, a ghost story told to scare kids at Halloween. Most people assumed it was exaggerated, a myth built from a real tragedy. But in 1987, something happened that brought the story back into the light. A construction company began developing the land, planning to build a residential neighborhood. They started clearing the cornfield in late August. On September 21st, exactly 106 years after Margaret's first episode, the backhoe operator reported hitting something solid in the black circle of earth. It was a door. Not a cellar door or a storm shelter. A wooden door, standing upright in the middle of the field, buried 4 feet underground, with no structure around it. Just a door. The construction crew debated what to do. Some wanted to leave it alone. Others were curious. Against better judgment, they opened it. Inside was a staircase. It led down into darkness, the steps carved from earth. the walls lined with roots. The foreman, a man named Bill Cartwright, volunteered to go down. He took a flashlight and a radio and descended into the dark. He radioed back after 30 seconds. "There's a room down here. It's full of dolls." After a minute, "They're all facing the same direction, toward another door." After 2 minutes, "I can hear something. Singing. It's coming from behind the door." After 3 minutes, silence. The crew waited. They called his name. No response. 2 more men went down to find him, but they came back within seconds, pale and shaking. They refused to say what they saw, but they sealed the door and filled the hole with concrete that same day. Bill Cartwright was never seen again. The construction project was abandoned. The land was sold back to the county for $1, with the stipulation that it could never be developed. The door, and whatever lay beyond it, remains buried under 6 feet of concrete. But the singing hasn't stopped. People driving past the old Dietrich property at night report hearing it, faint and distant, like a lullaby carried on the wind. Some have pulled over to investigate, but no one has ever found the source. The ones who venture too close into the cornfield report feeling watched, followed, like something is walking behind them just out of sight. And every full moon, without fail, someone reports seeing a woman in white standing in the corn, digging in the earth with her bare hands. Most people assume it's a prank. Teenagers, urban explorers, people looking for attention. But the Crawford County Sheriff's Office has a file, a thick one, filled with reports spanning over a century. Missing persons, unexplained disappearances, all connected to the same stretch of land. They don't investigate anymore. They just mark the reports and move on. Because there's an unspoken rule in Crawford County. You don't go to the Dietrich field at night. You don't walk through the corn during a full moon. And if you see a woman in white, you turn around and leave. You don't help her. You don't speak to her. Because if you do, you'll end up like Margaret Holloway, still digging, still searching, still bound to the earth, waiting for the full moon to rise again. The last confirmed sighting was in 2019. A hiker passing through Crawford County got lost and ended up near the old Dietrich property. It was October 21st, a full moon. He saw a woman standing in the cornfield wearing a white nightgown, her hands covered in dirt. He called out to her, asking if she needed help. She turned and looked at him. He said her eyes were pale, milky white, and then she smiled. The hiker ran. He made it back to the road and reported what he saw to the local sheriff. A search was conducted the next morning, but nothing was found. 3 weeks later, the hiker's wife reported him missing. He was last seen walking toward the cornfield in the middle of the night, barefoot, his hands covered in dirt.